My name is Dave Creamer from Ideas, or Ideas Training. And as you can see on the slide, we are at ideastraining.com, and we offer programming training in quite a few different programs. A lot of Adobe, but also Microsoft and a few other specialty programs. We do on-site, online training, obviously, and classroom-based training. So if you're interested, you would also have obviously been contacted by Terry. So you have our contact information. If you need any other information about particular training or more advanced Acrobat training, please let me know or let us know. Anyway, we'll start down the process. So we're going to just continue along. And the first thing is I need to go over a little bit of information just so you have a good foundation in Acrobat. Nothing too crazy, but I want to talk about people using Adobe Reader. It's important if you're doing forms that can be sent to people using Adobe Reader, there's a couple of issues you need to be aware of. First of all, Reader 10, Roman numeral X, and earlier cannot save form data on their own. Now that's going to be important when you're sending out forms. They can submit it electronically, but they can't save it and come back to it the next day. Now, there is an exception. You can use extended services from Acrobat Pro. There are server-based issues, which we'll talk about too, but we're just talking about Acrobat right now. There are a few other things that you can do with it, but you can extend the services so people with Reader can save it. Now, since Acrobat 11 and later right now means Acrobat DC, that's their new naming system, Document Cloud, can save form data, but only from Acrobat Pro forms, not forms created in other programs such as Lifecycle Designer, which is another Adobe program that specializes in creating very advanced PDFs, ones that can expand and contract based on user preferences. So if your users, the people you're sending the form to, are using Adobe Reader, you need to be aware of those issues. Now, for mobile devices, which is another thing to be aware of, people using tablets, interactive features in PDFs are generally not supported, and lifecycle designer forms are not supported because they're not, even though it's a PDF, it's not the same type of form as an Acrobat form. So you need to be aware of those issues. Not going to be quite a major problem if you're building all your forms in Acrobat. But if you're doing a lot of forms, I also suggest you take a look at what Adobe Designer, Lifecycle Designer can do for you. But it's not supported on tablets, only on computers. And if you distribute the forms, you can do it through extended services through Acrobat Pro. I will show you how. It's actually pretty straightforward. Just basically a save as. However, you are limited legally, not technically, but legally, to 500 users or viewers. There's some technical legal information that you can read up on Adobe's site. It's also in that little thing that everyone just clicks OK through when you first install the software. But you are limited to 500 users, and which could be a big problem for large companies. Now, Adobe also sells Lifecycle Enterprise. It can be very expensive depending on what you need. It's a la carte, so you pick the options you need. Now, there may be other options available through third parties, but they may not work reliably with Adobe Reader. So you need to, again, just be cautious when you're distributing forms and people are using Adobe Reader. That's the biggest issue. If they have Acrobat Pro or Acrobat Standard, you will have absolutely no problems at all. It's only with Adobe Reader that you're going to run into these either technical or legal issues. All right, so let's start talking about the fields in Acrobat. And I'm going to start demonstrating these too, of course. The most common field you're going to be using will typically be a text field. I would say roughly 75% or more of the forms, the fields in a form will be text-based. Now, that could include single line fields like first name, last name, multiple line fields for comments, numeric fields. You use text fields in Acrobat Pro to actually use them for numbers, and calculations. That would kind of go hand in hand. Date fields, and also you can even customize the format of a particular field. Now, we're not going to go into detail on every single one of these, but I just want to show you some of the options. So I am going to switch to Acrobat now. I have a few forms already open. Now I am using Acrobat DC. The interface, of course, is a little bit more confusing when you switch from one version to the other. If you're still using Acrobat 10 or 11, you'll have a slightly different interface, but your tools will essentially look the same once you get into that area. So in other words, once I get into the form editing area, it pretty much looks the same as it did for a number of versions back. It's just the initial interface that has changed. So what I'm going to do, I'm in Acrobat DC, that's the latest version. I'm going to click on Prepare Form over here on my tools on the right. And it's going to ask me a couple of things. First of all, I have turned off automatic detection. Notice it's off. If I have it on, which I can change, it's just a preference change, it will run the wizard and try to figure out this form on its own. Because this form is not designed properly for the wizard, it would do a very poor job. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to just do it manually. When it's off, it means I'm going to do all the work. The form wizard, you'll have to test. In some cases, it can save you a lot of work. In other cases, you have to do so much cleanup. It's not worth it. It's going to be difficult to say. It only takes a few seconds to try it, so it's worth trying it. I happen to know in this form it won't work. Plus, I want to show you how the fields work manually. So I'm going to select this form and start. And I am now in the form editing mode. I can tell that because I have my form tools up along the top. Here, I have my various tools. Now we're going to just concentrate on the text field for the moment. So I'm going to zoom in to my form, and I'm going to click the Add a Text Field button. Click on that. Now it has a default size, but I'm not restricted to that. I can come in here and just click and drag the field out. It's good practice even if you're doing a print-only form. In other words, forms that people are going to fill out electronically and simply print out, sign, and return to you. It's a good practice to get in the habit of naming your fields. It makes life a lot easier. So I'm going to come in here. This is the field underneath franchise. So this is company name. I could just abbreviate to company. This is your name, what you would refer to it as. You can abbreviate, you can type in shortcuts, any type of abbreviation you want there. As long as you know what it is, that's fine. Now, generally speaking, you'll probably want to click on all properties, and that will open up the dialog box for that field. Okay, you'll notice I named it. There's the name there. I could put in a little tooltip. When the mouse hovers over it, it would tell the user what to do. If I thought it was confusing, I could type in information like enter in your company name here, that type of thing. A lot of the stuff down at the bottom, initially, you're not going to change. We may or may not get into the options there, but generally I want the form to be visible so people can fill it. If it's not visible, people cannot fill it out. So I want it to be visible. In this case, I definitely don't want to rotate it. That would make it a little awkward to read and fill out. And if it's read only, the user wouldn't be able to fill anything in. I can use that to impart additional information to the user if necessary in a field, but we're not going to do that because we want them to fill in information. Required is only an issue when I'm electronically submitting. It will not be an issue when I am printing a form, because the idea is somebody could print a form out that's blank, go gather up the information and come back and fill it up electronically. So only during electronic submission does the required come into play. Okay, so we won't do this one as required, but we'll deal with that later. Appearance, what do I want it to look like? Now, in Acrobat, your forms generally have to be designed elsewhere. Notice this form was already pre-existing. It's a form, but it has no electronic or fillable fields in it. It's just a form that might be sent to a commercial printer and printed out on NCR form, three-part form. So in this case, though, to make it electronic, I need to put in these invisible fields. So there's no need for me to change the color. I could color code the fields. For instance, I could do the critical ones in a color code so the user actually sees them in a color. But by default, notice I have no color on there. The font is going to be 12 point Helvetica. I could certainly change the size depending on how big my text is. I could change the text color. Normally I'd suggest black. Anything less than black will print out, unless you're printing out to a color printer, it would print out in a shade of gray. So if I'm going out to a black and white printer, it might not be as easily read. So I tend to keep that in black. And I can choose the font. Now, I would suggest you stay with the fonts in here above the line. Okay, no, this is only a few. Typically, Helvetica is the default. I would suggest changing it there unless you had good reason to change it to something else. The reason is these fonts are built into Acrobat and Adobe Reader. So the fonts do not have to get embedded into the form. If I use a font below that line, those are the fonts that are on my computer. If I start using these fonts, I might make the form look a little prettier. Generally, it's going to be harder to read, but the idea is I could use a custom font, but the font would be required to be embedded into the PDF, or else the user may not have that font and they will not see the form the same way I intend them to. So stay with the basic fonts. It's a form, it's not a brochure or something like that that you're winning design awards with. It's a fillable object to get information back to you. Keep it simple. Position is just the mathematical or geometric position, left, right, bottom, height, width, etc. Now, of course, I just placed it visually. The alignment of the text inside the box. Most of the time I want it to be left. Once in a while I might center, but in that case I would do that. I could put in a default value, but that becomes potentially a hazard if the user ignores the field and it already has a value in it because I typed in the default amount. Generally, you want to avoid default values except for things like, say, I'm doing a quantity on an order form. I might default the quantity to 1 because if someone's placing an order, you would expect them to order a minimum of 1 item. So I could put that value in there. But most of the time, you want your default value to be empty. Whether the user can run spell checking on here and identify this field, that's up to you. Company names tend to be a little crazy nowadays, so I would probably turn that off. Most people would expect to be able to type in their company name. That would be useful for certain things, maybe like state. I could spell check that just in case. And scroll long text. Now, scroll long text would come into play if the user typed in something longer than what would fit in the box. Now, that's a pretty long field. I'm going to switch to preview. Notice in the upper right hand corner, I have a preview. So I can actually test this field out. Okay, I can type it out. Notice the type size is a little big, so I might want to lower the size down. My G is getting cut off. Okay, so I'll probably lower it down. But I'm just going to type out some characters in here until I fill up the entire field. Then it starts scrolling. Notice the initial ideas training is getting cut off. Now, all the text will be there. However, Notice a little plus sign shows up showing me that there's more text in this field that can fit visually. Now you have to ask yourself a couple of things. I'm going to switch back to the edit mode. So I'm going right up where I clicked preview is now edit. Get back into the editing mode. To get back to that dialog box, I'm going to double click. So what I have to ask myself is this form electronically submitted? If it's electronically submitted only, that's okay having data that overflows because I'll still get all the data. However, if it's a print form, that's a problem because that data is cut off and I might not see all the critical information that I need to see. So if it is a print form, you should not use scrolling text. You should only get the text that will fit inside the text box. Now to make this fit a little bit better, I'm going to switch back to appearance, switch it back to 10 point so I can fit more information in there. And I'm not, maybe even go down a tad more, 9 point. And you see I can fit all that information in there. Now obviously that's a really long company name. Chances are you're running into that. It's not going to be an issue. But remember, if it's a print form or a combination, print and electronically submission, you have to use the lowest common denominator, and that would be strictly print. Print is a little bit more restrictive. So in this case, I would turn off scroll long text. So when someone gets to the end of that text box, it just beeps at them and doesn't let them type any further. You're not going to find too many people that know rich text formatting codes, so generally I don't worry about that, just leave it off. And as you can see, I can limit the field to a certain number of characters. If, for instance, I was collecting this data into a database, I could limit it. So maybe the database said, oh, 50 characters maximum. I could set it to 50 characters maximum here. Now, for normal text fields, these others are not going to come into play. Actions is what happens if someone clicks their mouse on this. Generally, we don't want anything to happen. That would be with a button, typically. Format we'll talk about later, but this is a plain old text box. So we're done. Generally, we're good to go. We have our text box. Now, if this size right here, in this text size, the size of the field, if this is the norm for this field, I can right click on it, and down at the bottom of my menu, use current properties as new defaults. Now that's really handy because now if I click on this and drag a new text box, you'll notice it's already sized to the new setting. And guess what? It has the same type size. It has all the other settings. It doesn't scroll long text. Okay, so I have all those settings in here. If I can double click on it, I can come in and make edits. You'll notice as I go along, there's my 9-point Helvetica. Position obviously is changing per field, but the size is the same. The width and height is the same. Notice all the settings that I did in here match up exactly with what I did before. So that way I don't have to keep reinventing the wheel over and over again. Okay, I can just do that. And I can keep doing that. Or another thing, another technique I use a lot is I'll just copy this field. And I can do that in Windows by control dragging a field. Hold down my control key, click and drag, and I make a copy. Now, technically these fields are identical. They have the same name, which if I preview, it will actually fill the same data in both places. Okay, that's handy for multi-page forms where maybe I have their account number automatically entered in at the top of every page. But in this case, it wouldn't make sense. So after I did the control drag, I want to double click on it and rename the field. Okay, don't worry about the data that's in there. We can clear that out later. I was just showing you how if a field has the same name, it will automatically repeat the data. Very useful technique when you have multi-page forms. Again, the customer's name or the person filling out the form, they could enter in their name once and have it auto-populate everywhere it needs to go throughout the form. All right, so that's your basic fields. Okay, just plain old text fields. Now, there are a few other special options in here. For instance, we talked about I could just have city. That would be something that would enter in manually. Oh, let me type that in properly. There we go. And let's see, we can click here, make a new one. And I'm going to make a very short one here. This is going to be state. Click on all properties to get the dialog box. I can keep this dialog box open, by the way. But under options, I'm going to limit this to 2 characters. So we're limiting it to postal codes. Now, probably should get a tooltip in here. Please use postal codes. Okay, we'll keep that in there. And then I'm going to do one other field here. Okay, we'll name it zip. Properties. Now, everything here is fine. All this stuff is just fine. No need to spell check this. Okay, action's not going to change. Under format, however, I'm going to pick a special format. Notice by default, there's no format attached to it. In other words, people can type in whatever they want. But I can come up here. I can make it a number. That's how I turn something into a number field. A percentage, date field, time, if you use that. But I'm going to go to special. And under special, I have the option for zip code or zip 4 if I have it. Okay, now it's a little difficult because not everyone knows the zip 4. So I'm just going to do zip code. Okay, so this actually would have to be formatted as a zip code. Now, zip codes are actually text fields. They are not number fields. And the reason for that is that it has to be in there for a leading 0. Some of the zip codes begin with leading 0. All right, so you get the general idea of text forms. Let me go back to PowerPoint just to review. We saw that if I change the format options to a number field, it's being treated as a number. In other words, I wouldn't be able to type text in it. I can also do calculated fields. So let me come in here. I'm just going to put in a quick form here. I'm going to edit the form. I already have a field here. I have some fields. So I can come in here and watch what I'm going to do. Now, this only has 3 fields down. Okay, 1, 2, 3. Not a big deal. But I'm going to right click on it and I'm going to create multiple copies. This is really handy for filling out a lot of fields at once. By default, if it can do it, it will put in a 2 by 2 area, but I actually want to go just 1 across. So I'm going to look here, 1 across. I want to go 3 down. And then I can just tweak the settings in here, move them around a little if necessary as a group, and make sure they fit my form. And when I click OK, notice it automatically renames them. So instead of just airfare, they're automatically numbered. Airfare 0, 1, and 2. Keep in mind that could have been all the way down to 20 for me automatically. I wouldn't have had to create 20 fields. I just create 1 and automatically just multiply the others. Then I'm going to create a nice little setting down here. And I can come in and airfare subtotal, go to properties. Under format, I would want it to be none. By the way, I should have done the format first. Always do the formatting and the setup before you duplicate the field. Otherwise, you're going to have to redo it, unfortunately. And I want this to be currency. Notice I have all my different currency symbols. And I'm going to do a calculation. And I just want it to be a simple sum. Now, for calculations, you can see you can do sum and product, which would definitely get me through an order form. So I can add things up. Product would be quantity times unit price. I also have a few other options in here. Simplified field notation. That would be Excel-like formulas. Not exactly Excel, but Excel-like formulas. The only difference is instead of using a cell reference, I use the field name. Okay, that's the main difference. And anytime you have to get fancy in Acrobat Pro, when you see custom, you're basically talking about JavaScript. Custom script generally refers to JavaScript. Some of it's easy, some of it's a lot more complex. Some of the simple math in here wouldn't be that bad, but we wouldn't have that much time for it. So anyway, I'm going to just go to some, and I can come in here, and instead of having to pick all three of these, because keep in mind, what if I had 30 of them? I wouldn't have to click, 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 click. I can just click their parent. Notice I have their parent in here. Now, the reason I'm not clicking it right now is because I have that set to number. That's good. These are all numbers. I should have set them to currency first. And of course, I would want to align them to the right. No need to spell check number fields. Doesn't quite make sense to do that. So I'd set this to align right. Turn off spell checking. Okay, we have the format set up as a number field, which is great. Under calculations, we should be able to pick just the sum of the parent. Okay, and it's just a little bit of a tricky spot. There's a little bit of a bug in here. Okay, so you can actually sum up the parent in there, and it would just add those up automatically for you. So rather than having to select 30 or 40 fields, you can just automatically select the parent and have it take care of that entire column for you. So that actually is very, very handy. Now, a couple of other quick things we should go through. Obviously, for a half hour, we're not going to cover everything. We have multiple choice options, check boxes and list boxes. Check boxes and list boxes mean you can select more than one option. Single choice options include radio buttons, drop down list, that's like we use on websites all the time, and you could also use a list box again. To quickly kind of show you how those work, I'll just come in here and I will do a checkbox. I'm going to come in here and just click and drag. And I give it a name. Okay, so this name here will be called, it's called checkbox 7. Okay, so you can either name it here. I prefer to go to all properties, photo info, repeat. And under options, technically, yes is as good as anything else. I know I did it a little differently on the first one. So I'm just showing you a couple of options here, because remember, if they turn it on, it means yes, it is a repeat. So for checkboxes, most of the time you don't have to worry about what the exploit value is. Yes is really as good as anything else, but you can if you want to. But here, I want them all in the same overall category. Do one more checkbox. Again, I could have control dragged or placed multiple. Either one would work. Okay. And so on. Okay. And again, the value simply yes is good. Now, when I preview that, a checkbox just means I can select multiple options and I can deselect options. Multiple choice. Obviously, I can also deselect. That's all a checkbox is. Okay. I'm going to get rid of those checkboxes because I can also do a radio button. That's the little round one. Click and drag. Now in this case, it's a little different. Notice I have a group name. The group name is photo info because notice I'm asking for photo information up on top. The choice is what are they selecting? Boom. Okay. Now, here's the nice thing. I need at least two options. You have to have a two choice option minimum. I can add another button right here, which is really nice. Click and drag. Boom. Notice it's automatically set to photo info. If I have a group of radio buttons going on, 2 or 3 different radio buttons, I can select which group it belongs to. Okay, add another button. Just label your choice. And I'm going to add actually one more in here. I didn't do this for the checkbox because I knew these weren't really checkboxes. Okay, boom, let's preview it. And so for these, when I select a different one, the previous one deselects. Once I start answering a question, like in other words, what is my photo info, and I click on a radio button, I'm committed to an answer. So if you need to, put in a no answer radio button. Okay, but in most cases, you're asking a question, you want an answer. Now, you can do a couple of options. I'm going to open up a field that I already have done, okay, because again, we don't have all day to do this. I also have drop-down menus. I can do a little drop-down menu. That's like a radio button, except it's just designed a little differently. And those choices in there, if I prepare this form and I double-click on it, I can come in here and put in as many potential choices as I want. Okay, and I can also, the one I select is the default choice. When I have a selection in it, that becomes the default choice, unless someone chooses otherwise. So the drop-down list is basically like a radio button, only allows one answer. In other words, you're asking a question, what is your ad size? Only one answer back. Okay, so those are your choices. Now, of course, keep in mind in half hour, we can't show you everything. I'm just kind of showing you how some of the options work. List boxes are okay for single choices if you have really long lists, because drop-down menus get a little awkward for real. Let's say I had 100 things to choose from. Drop-down list gets a little awkward. A list box would work fine for that. For multiple choices, list boxes you have to avoid if you're using a print document, because someone could pick something at the top of a list and the bottom of the list, and I wouldn't notice that unless I was getting the data electronically. Now, other form fields, buttons for submission, reset, printing, custom, which is JavaScript, barcodes, and signatures. Now, again, I don't have time, unfortunately, to show you all of those, but to create a button, I can design a button elsewhere, which I would actually do because the built-in buttons are not very pretty. But the little OK one here, you just basically click and drag. That's your button tool. Click and drag, and you can create a button. You name it, you make it look the way you want it to look. There's no, under options, you can import an icon that you designed elsewhere, which is a good idea. You can design them in Photoshop. And under actions, that's what makes the button do something. Now, for example, I have a couple of options here. I have a reset. If I double click on this, you'll notice when someone clicks the mouse, that's on mouse up. In other words, someone clicks the let's go, it resets the form. And I have it set just to reset certain fields. I can pick and choose whether it resets the entire form at once or just certain fields. And you'll notice when I go to preview mode, I actually have reset listing info. So just the information that's in the bottom part of this form, not all the top contact information. That's what that one does. And this one resets everything in here. So if I typed in some information in here, I'll type in some gobbledygook, make some choices, make a menu choice here, boom. When I clear out the entire form, everything gets put back to the default settings. And the submit button over here, that submits the form. Okay, and it just sends it. I have a choice of sending just the form data, or I could actually return the entire PDF. Now, obviously, there are other choices, but we don't have, and in this case, I just have it going back to my mail. Okay, I'm just having it mail it back to me. The only problem with what I've done here is it would require the user to be on a computer that has their email, and it could be browser-based email that will work now. Okay, but I could also do a web server in here, but it would just be a little bit more complex. Okay, so I have some choices in there, as I said, for buttons. Now another option, again, I'm just going to review these quickly, is the barcode. That's handy when I have a form that is filled out but has to be printed out for people to sign it with a pen, what's called a wet signature. And that way, but instead I want to capture the data in a database, I can just scan in the barcode rather than having someone sit there with the form and retype everything. So barcodes are very, very handy for that type of stuff. And I can do electronic signatures. Okay, so people can sign it. I can either just send it to them and they can sign it, or I could submit it up on the Acrobat Cloud, especially with the DC version. You have to have the DC version for the newer features to work. People could sign it electronically just in their browser. They wouldn't even need Adobe Reader. They could just do a browser-based signature, and that way I would get a record of all their signings. Okay, last couple of things we're just going to review for time's sake. We can distribute our things via email or server. That will automatically enable reader rights. Now keep in mind, if I do it through Acrobat, and I would do that simply by closing out of editing and saving as an extended reader PDF so people can fill in the form. But if I do that, I am limited to 500 users of that form. Okay, we can also do it via server. And the nice thing that Acrobat does is we can also track the forms once they're sent. So we can remind people to fill out the form that we're waiting for the data, and I can see who's responded and who hasn't responded. So anyway, unfortunately, that's all the time we have today. Keep in mind, we obviously have a multi-day class in Acrobat. If you're doing just forms, we could also talk about doing one day online if necessary, if you want a little bit more in depth on everything, because half an hour, as you can see, is not enough time to cover everything. But I do thank you all for attending, and hopefully you can be in touch with Terry, as I mentioned, and her email, which you already have, is tkennedy@ideastraining.com if you're interested in classes. And if you have any quick questions, I will take them via email, but they will have to go through Terry. I'll be happy to answer any quick questions that I covered in the seminar. Please send them to Terry and she'll forward them to me. Thank you very much, and I appreciate you attending, and we hopefully will see you again soon.